we're happy to have you. And I think that you'll come to recognize that this is a fantastic group that has worked really, really hard. We're happy to have you join this group and welcome you. And yes, as Alan mentioned, my name is Dawn Ramsey. I serve as mayor of the city of South Jordan, and I represent Salt Lake County on the Point of the Mountain. And I've been asked to conduct today's meeting because we have several legislators and our lieutenant governor who are very busy at the Capitol right now with the session. So as they come and go, that's understandable today. We understand that and we appreciate it, but I will be filling in today in that role. Is there anything that you would like to say, Lieutenant Governor? Is there anything you'd like to say to this group, to the board?
Well, no, I'm really excited to dig into this. Alan and I have had a good conversation, and this is a really, really exciting project that I'm excited to be a part of. And I appreciate the incredible amount of work that all of you have put into this and will continue to put into this. So I'm excited to learn and open to everybody's feedback and input. And I understand that you've all been doing this for a long time, and I'm the newbie, so I have a lot to learn, and I'm okay with that.
Well, and we're okay with that. We recognize that you're getting your feet, wet by a fire hose at this point. I mean, this is not a subtle way to jump in. So we appreciate your willingness to be part of this and welcome aboard. And we recognize that you'll have to leave a little early at some point. So we understand that and thank you. Okay, today's agenda really is fairly light on the action items, but we have a lot of important updates. And so felt like even though it's the session, there's a lot of work taking place and it's definitely worth having this meeting and sharing the updates. So we're going to jump right in and you know what? I don't have a copy. I need to read where's the statement? I don't know that I have a copy of the statement that expresses why we are meeting electronically. Oh,
Mayor, I sent you a copy of that by email earlier, but if you'd like, I can read it.
Look and see. Maybe it's on the back. I have printed everything you sent, but I sent it on front and back. So I apologize, but I really don't think it's here.
No problem. It came earlier today, but if it'd be easier, I'd be happy to read that for you.
If you have it right in front of you, I'll let you go ahead and do that.
I do. So this is the required meeting determination. Declaration of Presiding Officer, a closure of public meeting of the Point of the Mountain State Land Authority Board. I, V. Lowry Snow, declare as follows. 1, I am chairperson of the Point of the Mountain State Land Authority Board, and I make this declaration pursuant to Utah Code 52-4-2066. 2, I have personal knowledge of the facts herein stated, and if called to do so, I would testify consistently herewith. 3, on December 17th, 2020, the board held, oh no, I got the wrong one. I thought I had it. Sorry, I'm reading the wrong one.
Well, I remember signing it.
Send it over.
Oh, this one is, I'm sorry. I was reading a different declaration.
I can definitely send it over to Dawn or to you, Alan.
If you would, I could open it right now. I'm prepared to open it right now.
Okay, I've got it now. If you're ready, I'll just go.
If you're ready, go for it.
I, Lowry Snow, co-chairman of the Point of the Mountain State Land Authority Board, have determined that the February 9th, 2021 meeting of the board will be held electronically without an anchor location. This determination is based on the following facts. 1, Utah is currently dealing with COVID-19, which has been determined to be a pandemic. COVID-19 is extremely contagious and can be deadly to those who contract it, especially those of advanced age and underlying health conditions. 2, the agency offices in Salt Lake County are currently in the state's high-risk category. This limits the size of public gatherings to individuals within your own household and requires the wearing of masks and social distancing in public places. People are encouraged to stay in their homes. 3, a vast majority of agency staff and the members of the board are teleworking to avoid unnecessary contact with others. 4, the boardroom is insufficient to allow social distancing and reasonably safe accommodation of the board and the public. 5, the board uses an electronic platform which allows interested parties to view the meeting, hear discussions, and provide written comment. Dated second day of February 21 and signed by our co-chairman, Lowry Snow.
Great, thank you for that. We appreciate that. We want to be compliant with the noticing of why we're meeting electronically. So thank you, appreciate that. And welcome, we have Dan Hemmert who's joined us, and he is also the other newest member of this board. Welcome to Point of the Mountain State Land Authority. We welcome you. Is there anything you'd like to share?
Nope, just excited to be here. Thanks for all you do.
Well, we're happy to have you. And as I said to Lieutenant Governor Henderson, I think you'll really find that this is an outstanding group that has done a lot of great work. And there's a lot of good things happening at the point. And we welcome you and we're glad to have you be part of this team. All right, with that, we will move on to our action item, which is to approve the minutes from our January 12th, 2021 board meeting. Those minutes were sent out. Has anyone had an opportunity to review those? And if there's no questions or comments or amendments to be made, I am prepared to accept a motion on those minutes.
Madam Chair, Mayor Walker, I move we approve the minutes.
Thank you. We have a motion by Mayor Walker. Is there a second?
I'll second it, Jim Russell.
Thank you. With a motion and a second, any additional discussion about the minutes? Okay, seeing none, all in favor of approving the minutes, please unmute and say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Okay, those minutes are approved. Thank you. Next up is our public comment portion of the meeting, and it's very important to us as a board that the public have the opportunity to weigh in at every opportunity possible. This is a very public project that belongs to the state of Utah. So I will open the floor to any member of the public who would like to speak. I'd ask that you please turn on your camera and give me a wave so I can call on you. And then we ask that you give us your name for the public record. Will be on public record, and anyone who'd like to address the board will get 3 minutes to speak. So the time is now yours. All right, I'm not seeing anyone. Last call. Okay, we will close the public comment portion of the meeting and move on to our update. We have an SOM update that we're looking forward to. So efforts are still early on, but there's a lot of great work taking place, and we really just appreciate the SOM team. Our lead planning consultants are wrapping up the first phase of this master planning process and identifying opportunities and constraints. And so they're here to share with us some of their initial findings and deliverables from phase 1 and give us an overview of our next steps going forward. So I'm not sure who would like to take the lead from SOM.
I think Doug will give a few comments and then I'll take over.
Great. I will turn the time over to Doug and ask you to take it away. The floor is yours.
Great, thank you. Pete, I don't know if you can share your screen. What we'd like to do is share progress on the first phase of work that we've taken on since meeting with you all a couple of weeks ago. Pete, if you go to the next slide. And just as a reminder, this first phase is very much focused around not only further analysis and background for us as we start off on this journey over the next 5 months, but also that we continue to identify both the opportunities and constraints, really with the desire to establish a set of planning, we'll say metrics, in which we can as a group evaluate the different scenarios, but also discuss what are the key takeaways and how we can apply those to an optimal plan for the point of the mountain. So Pete, if you go to the next slide, one of the things we'd like to do is share some of the benchmarking, or perhaps as we refer to it, analog projects. And we identified quite a long list in terms of their value related to both the economics and different delivery models, paralleling a lot of what Aaron and the team at RCLCO have been looking at, but also some of the more qualitative aspects in terms of what was the, I think as we like to understand it, the secret sauce. What is it has made these projects unique in terms of their placemaking, identity, mix of use, And then we also stepped outside of North America and tried to understand if there were other global benchmarks that we could learn from. So Pete, if you go to the next slide, this is just a location of several of them, not only on the coast, but elsewhere in the country. These are all hubs of centers of talent and innovation. And I think it's interesting to understand how these compare in scale. So you can see the point, the second from the right here. This is just the 700 acres as it relates to these other projects. We felt this was interesting because, as you know, there's things we could apply to the entirety of the site, but also things we could apply at a smaller scale or a neighborhood scale. And as you see on this slide, we then started to categorize those as they relate to density. That one of the things we heard is to have a range of density across the site and how that relates to, again, achieving that critical mass or unique combination of uses that really add to the value of a place. And lastly, through our conversations and research, we come back to how these takeaways further advance the key vision elements defined by the community and this board as relates to the future planning and delivery of the point. So we'd like to take a minute to go through a couple of these in a little more detail. We can circle back to any of them, but we could also provide this information for further discussion and deeper dives if there's things that intrigue members of the committee and other members of the community. One of the projects is Cambridge Crossing in Boston. It's actually outside of Boston in the city of Cambridge. This is a 20-year project that has undergone quite a shift from a predominantly residential plan development to one now is more mixed use and being able to adapt to the increase in technology and life sciences we're seeing in Boston. If you go to the next slide, Pete. This framework was centered around a clear set of development blocks, well scaled so they could make that transition from residential to larger floor plate life sciences, and all organized around a series of open spaces that connect to a broader system of trails, as well as connection to the public transit in Boston. A couple of key takeaways. This project's success focused a lot on the partnerships and co-location of not only industry and corporate headquarters, but also with the institutions in Cambridge, MIT, Harvard, and others. They developed open space as part of the first phase. And with that was the programming of this really great mixed use project at the end they called The Shed. This became an anchor in the public realm in the first phase, and they continued to add open space as they developed the site over time. And I think the last key takeaway is that it's not only mixed use, but the framework plan allowed it to adapt to other uses as the market changed over the last 10 to 15 years. And it'd actually be a great time to talk with the development team that is now delivering the final phase of that project as it's nearing completion. Another example was King's Cross. So this is in the city of London, in central London, and its benefit is really from the proximity to two major train stations. You can see at the top of the photo, both King's Cross and St. Pancras train station. But what's interesting is how, again, this precinct, this district has evolved with a blend of housing, tech, but also expanded community programming that really created a place out of what was highly underutilized land within a key part of London. Next slide. Next slide, Pete. Great.
Yeah, I advanced.
There are, I think, no problem. You know, I think there's also a lot of lessons learned here about diversity of building typology, of scale of open space, how they're all connected, how they integrate heritage elements or historic elements. This is the old coal yard that they've turned into a mixed-use shopping and food amenity within the center of the development. But this has been open for a while, this project, and I think there's been a lot of evaluation on what are the elements to success. If you go to the next slide, Pete, one of them I think we're very interested in are the principles for a human city. We've talked about the 15-minute city. There's actually research that the development team here did on how those principles tie directly to the outcomes. There is a clustering of knowledge jobs that all benefit from shared amenities and putting those in the public realm as opposed to in individual buildings. The activation and what they call place shaping, you can see some of those spaces up on screen, but it's enhanced by an expansive programming effort that they do year round and on weekends. So this becomes a part of everyone's daily life. And it's also anchored by other uses. There is a College of Art and Design, there's a grocery store, there's other things that in many ways make this a very dynamic and diverse place on its own. Next slide, Pete. There might be a bit of a delay. One we've talked about before is Mission Bay, just south of downtown San Francisco. Again, this area has been planned many years ago and has seen sort of dramatic changes in land use over time, but the principles of this well-established block framework, allowing for public, private, institutional partnerships has continued to benefit and sort of attract other companies to this key site in San Francisco, such as the new Uber headquarters, as well as the Chase Center, which is the home of the Golden State Warriors. Next slide, Pete.
Yep.
Clearly, this does benefit from its proximity to San Francisco and being within the Bay Area, but I think one of the most distinguishing features is the close partnership with institutions like the University of California, San Francisco, as well as a new hospital. And these are all connected by a rail extension along 3rd Street that leads right into downtown San Francisco. So, as I mentioned, one of the key takeaways is the way they've set up and established these partnerships, having a clear framework with flexible size blocks, but also that there is a very clear and high level of importance placed on the development of parks and the design of the streets. Next slide. One that was a little different but intriguing to us was Navy Yard in Philadelphia. This was called one of the coolest shipyard in America. Again, it came through a partnership with government in terms of the redevelopment and repositioning, not only of these older facilities, but also redevelopment of many of the lands here not far from the sports facilities outside of downtown Philadelphia. They are currently undergoing an update to their 2013 master plan as a way to respond to evolving market dynamics. But if you go to the next slide, Pete, they've also seen some successes in the first phase in terms of building public space as part of the initial investment and how they program and activate that to bring employees out of the individual buildings into the public realm, really to emphasize the sense of place. And given the scale and sort of openness of the site, they're able to look at an expanded set of uses beyond just office, retail, and industrial. They are doing R&D. So the ability to actually make and prototype things that are happening within the lab or within the technology offices. They've also provided space for Penn State University as a tenant. And in doing so, continue to look at large and small businesses.
Hey, Doug.
Yeah.
Wondering if I could make a comment.
Go ahead, Steve.
One of the things that we've been talking about on these analogs is the approach to parking. And you'll note that most of the ones we've been looking at are pretty urban. And you don't see very much in the way of parking. The parking is either they're highly transit accessed or the parking is subterranean, which of course is very expensive to do. And so one of the interesting things about this Navy Yard project is you'll notice the first one that actually has a lot of surface parking, which is more typical of our site and our particular, location. Now, our goal is to not necessarily do this, but we just want to pull out, identify that one of the things the team is doing is really looking at different, parking solutions, ranging from highly surface parking, as this is shown, to more urban parking types, recognizing that as the point develops, it might, in the early days, might have more surface parking, and in the later days, more urban parking. And that transition and the economics of that will be very important to build into our master planning.
Well, and Steve, I think this is also a great example of how a plan can adapt from an early phase to a higher density model over time as land values increase and the attraction of other companies move on to site, which is part of the rationale behind the update to the plan that's currently underway for the Navy Yard. And then one last one we looked at, more residential, but trying to take cues from the adjacency and connectivity to open space and how to create diversity within smaller neighborhoods at the Central Park, which was previously the Stapleton, known as Stapleton. And if you go to the next slide, Pete, there's some examples here of how working with different developers to ensure not only the quality of the public realm, the maintenance of the public realm, but the diversity in the housing product between and within each of the neighborhoods, as well as projects like we've talked about with Daybreak and others that you have all referenced in terms of the smaller scale urban centers that can connect people within each of these residential clusters.
Great. Thank you, Doug. So as Doug mentioned, this is just a small sample of a variety of project analogs that we're looking at. As Steve mentioned, we're trying to understand different levels of density and different levels of implementation strategy. But some things we're starting to see over and over again is this idea of a mix of land uses, highly amenitized environments, institutions as catalysts, and then of course the importance of transit as a driver of connectivity and reduced offsite trips. So it's a very, I think, effective study, and we're going to move that forward as a key driver of our of the master plan process. So I'd be happy to take any questions on that, or I can keep going into the next couple of sections of the update.
Thank you. Anybody have any questions?
So thank you, Don. The next thing we want to touch on is just a quick update on our data compilation. We have done data harvest from these 12 groups. So we're doing quite a bit of study of existing plans, of which you can see 12 of those here. We're also undertaking an extensive GIS analysis of the site. And I'll share with you a few maps. We don't really have time to get into too much detail, but here's a map of job density. We're also looking at other factors that influence the site, such as housing. And we are looking at two catchment areas, what we're calling catchment areas. So one is close to the site, about a mile from the site. And this one illustrated here is the 4 to 5 mile catchment area. And we'll talk a little bit about the implications of these catchments. We're also looking at schools. This is a topic that has come up with the working groups. and of course, existing employment hubs in and around the site. So this is providing the fundamentals of a very good data set for the next phase, the programming phase. And then finally, some open space analysis, again, in the 4 mile to 5 mile catchment area, which will indicate to us the shortcomings or needs for parks. I wanted to touch briefly on the project programming. As you can see in this diagram from the left-hand side, we have 6 primary program inputs that stage 1 really was structured to collect. We're in the process of finalizing that assessment of these 6 inputs. We're also in the process of defining 3 program scenarios, which will be carried through to stage 2, which is scheduled to begin next week. In stage 2, we'll begin to look at actual physical plans for the site using those program scenarios. And I'd like to introduce Ryan Hills. He's our transportation consultant. And Ryan, maybe if you can just give a very quick overview of sort of the kickoff for the site access study.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Ryan Hells with Hells Engineering. And what we've been asked to do is to come in and look at the development and see how we can make this work the best that we can within the travel demand model, and to look at the accessibility to the site. How do we arrive at the site via Bangerter Highway, I-15, a future frontage road system, and then the connectivity down to 146 South. The first thing we did, and this is kind of the base level planning, is we wanted to go in and look at what we consider the D variables. It comes from some work that was done by the EPA, so it's a modified methodology, but it's really looking at the density, the diversity, the design, destination, accessibility, distance to transit, and development scale. And in looking at all of these, next slide, we can go in and evaluate the site. One of the goals that we've all had as a group together is to have a better understanding of what kind of key reductions and key factors go into this to reduce the amount of traffic leaving the site, what I would call internal capture. So those people that live on site to stay on site, to live, work, play. And S1 has done a great job of talking about this 15-minute city. They've done a wonderful job of looking at these different developments around the country, around the world, and bringing those elements to this site. This would be kind of that first layer of it, and looking at how we can evaluate the land use scenarios. So we looked at housing, jobs, and retail in various different formats and relationships. In this scale across the bottom, you see the 10 different scenarios that we ran, along with the percentages on the vertical side of the graph, and just showing how we changed the housing and increased from 30% on the left-hand side to 70% on the right-hand side. And then commensurately, we had to change jobs and retail appropriately in the same vein. Next slide. As we did that, we were looking for an outcome that would produce an amount of trips on site that would be generated throughout this entire 606 acres. And what that means, what you're seeing with these red dots is the varying levels of trips that are generated by this mix of land uses, with the intent of trying to come in with a more cohesive reduction. So when we look at the reductions, which are shown on the vertical scale, down on scenario 1, where it says 27.2%, that's the amount of trip reduction that we can estimate with this type of a land use mix. So we go all the way on the far side from a high jobs area to looking at bringing those jobs down on the far right-hand side and increasing the residential component. As we increase the residential component on scenario 10, you can see that we drop from 243,000 trips to 170,000 trips. So again, that's about a 30.2% reduction in trips, just based on the land use mix and scenarios. I think with that, that's a very brief overview, but it tells you kind of the starting point. Peter, anything else?
Yeah, and I think, thanks, Ryan. I think for the board's information, what this told us from a data standpoint is that a high jobs proportion would generate more trips, whereas a higher residential proportion would generate fewer trips. So what we've done is we've carried a residentially focused program model forward as well as a jobs-focused program module forward. And we'll talk a little bit about what that means exactly. In terms of programming, we've expanded our reach and scope a little bit in terms of what we're looking at. So we're looking beyond just the site proper. And as I mentioned, we have done a data analysis of a 4-mile to 5-mile catchment area. So you see that circle here on this map. So we're looking at 3 scenarios for programming. One is what we call a complete community, and that's really what would we do on the site to tie together these 3 communities, Draper, Riverton, and Bluffdale. What are the real needs of these communities for this important piece of property? The second is what we're calling a sub-regional hub. So we're expanding the area of influence a little further out to include Lehigh, Sandy, South Jordan. This is really a larger catchment area. What would the project do to meet the needs of these communities? And then finally, the third scenario is what we're calling a regional catalyst, or a regionally focused project. And that's really looking at the point at the largest scale. So how it would fit in with development in Provo and Salt Lake and some of the universities that are affiliated with those communities. So how does it fit into the Wasatch Front, essentially? So these are the 3 different program scenarios that I just described with the general catchment or area of influence. And then we've gone ahead and started working with RCLCO to develop a little more detail on these 3 ideas. And you can see here the text in yellow are the variables that we're currently incorporating into the program mix. We don't want to introduce too many variables at this early stage, so we can do reasonable analysis. But we are looking at the amount of open space versus development area. That's one variable. And the other variable is the percentage of residential versus the percentage of commercial. So we have begun to adjust these variables depending on the vision for the site according to those 3 ideas. We also are beginning to look at worker profiles on site, as well as visitor profiles and also potential resident profiles. So just trying to understand who would come here, what they are interested in having here. And this diagram illustrates the range of uses that might occur on the site throughout the day at the point. So that's a quick overview of the programming. I'm happy to take any questions. Just one more slide where we are on public outreach. We have quite an extensive public outreach program going forward. We have 4 primary audiences that we are talking to: stakeholder groups, working groups, and the general public. We did have quite a successful milestone meeting 1 about 2 weeks ago with the working groups. And I think the general takeaways from that meeting with the working groups was very positive. And so they liked many of the concepts that we showed from the master plan process that we undertook in December. So they asked questions around civic facilities, in particular schools and health related land uses. So we'll be incorporating that feedback into the next round of master planning. So Dawn, that's our update. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Peter. Appreciate it. And Doug as well. Thank you both. All right. Is there anybody that has any questions for this SOM team while they're here? I know that we have a small group with us here today. However, this is a lot of great information. Anybody have any questions?
And I'll leave it on this slide since I think this is sort of a key takeaway for today.
Yeah, I appreciated the information about the 3 different program scenarios and what you're taking into account with that. I really appreciated that. I liked the presentation a lot. There were things about King's Cross that I thought were very cool. San Francisco overwhelmed me a little bit. That's a pretty intense use. And I've been to Central Park in Denver, and I really liked that. And there's a lot about it. I liked the images from Philadelphia. So there's a lot of great things that you're considering, and I appreciate that. I liked the concept of the shed in Cambridge, how they put that open space in first. And my guess is that the public probably really liked having that go in initially, and then continuing with the open space as they developed, but having something that significant go in phase one. I'm going to imagine that went over pretty well with people there.
Yeah, and it created a place at almost a phase zero to bring people and to introduce people to this amazing site.
Yeah, I can imagine that. I really like that.
And
Okay.
Mayor Ramsey, I think along with the parking that Steve mentioned, we did show some projects that had higher density than what would occur at the point. So I hope nobody was intimidated by that. It's not the density levels we're proposing, but it's really more about the vibrancy and the interconnection of programming and public space, as Doug mentioned, that we're interested in.
I did recognize that. The San Francisco picture did really a little bit set me back. I went, oh yeah, we're not. I know we're not doing that.
Right.
However, I can appreciate it was shown. I do understand why it was shown, and so I appreciate that clarification for anybody else who may watch this or be watching this. That's good. Thank you.
Okay.
This Mayor Walker, I have a question for you guys on this last slide. So with the scenarios, so you're moving forward looking at how these three scenarios would develop. Is that what I understand you're saying?
That's correct. And I think Aaron from RCLCO will touch on this a little bit, but yes. So the idea is to have three programming concepts, which you see here. And then in stage 2, we'll test those out on the site. So actually drawing physical plans for the site that model these three ideas.
If I can add a little color to that, I mean, we developed these as a team, and the goal is to really, and it's kind of hard to see the difference in these few numbers that are here, but they're really three completely different ideas. The first idea is, what if we looked at the site as a complete community, perfectly balanced, almost as a self-sufficient, a development district with a balance of jobs, housing, and retail, and the one of these scenarios that is specifically designed to have the lowest amount of sort of traffic impact on the surrounding area, the surrounding subregion, because it has the highest level of internal trip capture because of the perfect balance of land uses. So we thought we needed to test that scenario and see what it looked like and see what the implications are to the regional systems. The second one is saying, what if we looked at the site as a opportunity to really enhance the quality of life of all the surrounding cities? I mean, that became kind of one of the primary drivers. And so there's a fairly significant entertainment district, there's a cultural district, there's a large sports park, and some affordable or workforce housing component. It was like, if you just look at, how this can play a role of meeting sort of unmet needs in the surrounding area, what would that look like? And that's what number 2 is. And number 3 is, this one is all about economic development. It's got the least amount of residential. It has a moderate amount of retail, but the retail is really focused of creating a sort of a STEM-based, millennial-based, young worker, high-quality worker kind of, Shangri-La, in terms of a cool place to live and work and play, and an extra strong focus on employment and innovation, and probably the biggest impact on the surrounding roadway system. So those are three pretty different ideas of what the district becomes, and it's reflected in the detailed programming more than what kind of shows up here. And also it'll be different in urban form. and SOM will explore different urban patterns for the site based on those three different emphasis. And we think what we can get out of that, and it doesn't mean we have to pick one. It means that we can actually borrow attributes of all of them and combine them into the next stage of design. But we want to have fairly clear and pure ideas of these alternatives so we can test them both qualitatively and quantitatively with a variety of metrics and see how they stand up and compare with each other.
It's great information. Thank you. Mayor Walker, did you have anything else?
No, I like the, if I'm going to lean one way, it's 2 or 3, but I guess I like the concept of looking at the 3 types of uses. I do want to just reiterate on the open space part of it that, we have in the city of Draper, which this site sits in, we have about 5,000 acres of dedicated open space, already 115 miles of built trail, both paved and dirt. So just keep in mind when you're thinking about lots of open space, we have already done a lot of it. And I think that should get included in your scenario with respect to, my vision's always been that it be an economic driver, not a big park. So that's just my comments.
Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, the difference in the open space is like 5%. So it's not a huge, it's really more how the open space is being used that's in the site, not necessarily taking huge swaths and making it open space. So hopefully that clarifies.
It's great. Thank you. Okay, appreciate that. Thank you so much for that presentation. We're going to move on to item number 5 on our agenda, and it's an update on our business plan subcommittee. So we've met twice. Following our last meeting, we created a board subcommittee to evaluate the options that our CLCO has identified and to develop some of the recommendations for our business plan. And members of that committee included Representative Snow and Representative Handy and myself, Mayor Ramsey, April Cooper, and Jim Russell. And we had a good, constructive, robust discussion about our proposed organizational structure going forward and our approach to this development. And so we have Erin Talkington here. We appreciate so much her being here to summarize our discussion and really share the recommendations from the subcommittee. So I'm going to turn the time over to Erin and appreciate all of her efforts.
Thank you so much. And I know we've got a handful of our subcommittee members on the call, as well as some others who weren't able to join us. So I'm going to go through at a very high level, what we heard and what we discussed in some of our next steps. But I would really welcome any additional comments or questions or ideas, if there's something that you think I didn't include that you'd like to share with the rest of the group. So I'm just going to pull up my screen really quickly. There were kind of 2 big topics that we talked about. One is the land authority's role in development, how it's going to interact with the private and the public sector. And the second one, which we'll get to in a second, is the internal organizational structure. And so we had 2 meetings, one where we really, got all the questions and comments out on the table, and one where we really came back together and said, okay, what do we think about these and where do we need to push and pull? And so, what I'm about to share is really, I think, the synthesis of where I felt like there was a lot of agreement and direction. And so some of these ideas are going to sound familiar. The first is that the land authority should plan to deliver some of the major site infrastructure so that we can get the site segmented into different districts that can each have a different master developer. And that's an approach that I think really resonated with the group. And, concurrently with that, or really coincidentally, that means that the state's going to need to stay in the process, just long enough to really make sure that we maximize the value of the site, and that we utilize the land use authority that's invested with the state being involved as a landowner. And so that means that we just need a mechanism to ensure that the land authority retains some control over the mix of uses at the site as we go forward with development, so that we don't get a couple years into it and make sure that somebody wants to change something that really doesn't stick with the original goals or intentions of the plan. And that's not something that we're that worried about. It's something that we can structure within any future development agreements. But it's something that I think we heard loud and clear that we need to be careful about. And we had a lot of conversations about how the Land Authority interacts with the public sector, which I think is a topic that RCL Co's work probably hadn't explored enough in our previous iterations. And so one of the things that we heard is, that a land lease might be really appealing for you all because it would let the state remain the owner and have some of that control and potentially change some of the funding mechanisms for infrastructure. And so that's an outstanding question we'll talk about in a second. But that idea that if the state remains the owner, it might open up some opportunities for us in terms of funding. And the other main piece that we started to flesh out is this idea of, who makes the decisions, who administers the ongoing activity at the site, and who serves the site. And the idea that those might be different for different topics, but that largely our goal is to make sure that this organization can utilize its land use authority that was granted to it from the state to drive the types of development that happen and make sure that we're really comfortable with the direction it's going. That we need to contract with the city of Draper to actually administer some of those services, like building code reviews and engineering, and making sure that when somebody submits a plan for a building that it meets all of the code expectations. That's not an expertise we're going to build within POMSLA. That's something we can leverage from the city. And that we're actually going to need a handful of different local, service district and jurisdictional contracts to provide public services. The water district is separate from this, some of the other authorities. Some of those services will be provided by the city of Draper, and that we're going to need to have an agreement with each of those groups on how that's going to work going forward, and how they'll be compensated for those services. And so that's something that we'll be working on with JC and council going forward to think about what the framework for that looks like, so that we can start having those conversations with different groups. On that second topic about the organization, we had some really meaty conversations, and I think came to a really good place in terms of understanding what the role of the team would be and what the role of this proposed advisory committee might be. And we were formally calling it the investment committee, and learned very quickly that one of the challenges was actually our wording. So we're taking suggestions if anybody has a better title for this group. Right now we're calling them the advisory committee. And this is the group where we thought that it would make sense to have a small group that wasn't really, a day-to-day employee of the Land Authority, but could provide knowledge and experience based on past developments that they've worked on. And, it would also include, some groups like DFCM and probably Jim Russell and Steve and RCLCO and, some of the internal team members. But the goal of this group is really to provide that expertise and leverage for the board, just to help frame difficult and complicated decisions. It's not going to be a gatekeeper. The board's going to see everything, but it's the group that's going to get in the weeds. And that's going to let this board really use their time effectively, so that instead of having to dig in and get into the nitty gritty of some of these decisions, this advisory committee can help ask the staff some of the hard questions and come to the board with those decisions framed, so that this group can really think about processing the information and determining which outcome's better for the state. And so within the internal team, we're working on the theme that the organization really needs to be self-sustaining, and that our goal is to evaluate the ways in which the revenue from the land, whether that's a sale or a lease, or another funding mechanism from our development partners, can really provide autonomous funding for the Land Authority, rather than, constantly going back to the legislature and asking for an annual appropriation. And there's a lot of different models for how we might do that. Some of them, might require us to amend the statute, and some of them might be things that we can do without having to make some of those changes. And so, we're going to look into how exactly that might work, including talking to some groups like PRI and SLR who have some experience with this. And there are a couple of early hiring needs that we're optimistic we're going to have funding for in next fiscal year. and a director of development and probably some sort of operations manager are likely some of those early hires that we'll need to get in place so that Alan can really have a team to support him. And we'd also like to have that advisory committee start to be made official for next fiscal year. Even if we're still adding to it or modifying exactly who's part of that. But ultimately, I think the goal for the organization holistically is, one, to be self-sustaining, and two, to make sure that we're reinforcing the board as the final decision maker and the group that is going to be responsible to its constituents for making sure that the project, runs smoothly and really delivers on its promises. And so this is just a quick sketch of, how we've been envisioning this advisory committee, right? It would have a couple of internal staff members. We like the suggestion of adding Jim to that group based on his background and expertise. And, it might have a couple of outside development and finance professionals. We've seen some good examples of who this could be, but it would be people who won't have conflicts of interest. We could really ensure that. And would bring a perspective of actually having built projects that, Steve and I have lots of great input for you all, but, we haven't actually been the developer of an actual project and had to make some of these decisions. And having one or two people who have that type of expertise would be really valuable for this group going forward. And so over time, that internal staff, I think, can really be lean and mean, right? We're going to start with, we've already got Alan in place. We'll start with a director of development. We'll start with, somebody on the administrative side. And as we see how many districts are really going to be developing at the same time and what the level of coordination required is, we can, build out some of these other positions over time. Really working to leverage the experience of the developers that we're bringing on board, but just making sure that our internal team, has the ability to kind of like sit toe to toe with them and have a really in-depth and valuable conversation, as opposed to, just the developers bringing all of the expertise, but we don't necessarily have the ability to kind of gut check and understand what the implications of their proposals might be. And so we've started to talk a little bit about next steps, but I think it's really about local service agreements, thinking about what that framework looks like, evaluating the impact of a lease and sale decision on some of the public finance mechanisms, refining our understanding of infrastructure costs and which of those we're going to be asking the state to bear. And just digging a little bit about what the next steps are to start building out the organization with the idea that we might have the funding in place, sometime this summer to start having a couple more people on board. And so with that, I'd open the floor to questions or to others who'd like to add some of their own personal color on the conversations that we had.
Thanks, Erin. Is there anybody else who was part of this working group that has anything you'd like to add?
Not really add anything other than just tell Ernest did a great job of capturing the discussion and talking points very well again.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you. Anybody who wasn't a part of the working group have anything you'd like to add? Okay.
Is this where we're deciding about this concept, or what are you asking for, Mayor?
No, I'm just asking your thoughts. And I know you have some, so you're welcome to share them.
I always have some.
And I appreciate it.
I like the concept of moving it forward, obviously, and working, but I mean, I think we got to, this is not something I want to just rush into. I want to make sure that the statutory board, I mean, if this is what the state and the governor's office wants to do, then I guess that's what it is. But we have a pretty good group that has the, I think, good perspective from various angles on, and it's not that big of a board. I just don't want us to cede all of the power and ability to do this job to essentially a committee of the board that although it won't be a gatekeeper, it will in fact be one. It just by nature of the fact that we won't be getting in the weeds, it's going to be that way. I'm just leery of that. I'm not on board and sold that I think this is the best way to go, but that's just me.
I could respond to that, Mayor Ramsey. I think there is no intent to take any authority or decision-making away from the board. It's only to provide bodies that can do the day-to-day work and get roll up their shirt sleeves and get to work on this and bring us back information and represent us. There's zero intention to have this group be decision makers. With the caveat of whatever decision authority they're given by the board.
I think if I can add to that, Mayor Walker, I know that that's been a concern, and I think that's why we really talked about that at length in our group. We did talk about that at length, and making sure that what you're saying is the way things really turn out, so that statutorily it goes forward the way it was designed to go forward. And I do think that this proposal, you know, for the most part, I mean, as we can finesse this and really continue to look at it, but I think Erin did a good job of presenting, as she said, the high level concepts of, okay, some professional staff to fill some key roles that are day-to-day roles, like Jim said, kind of roll up your sleeve and get in there and do that work and bring it back to the board, to the Land Authority Board. I think that was important to all of us. And I think that really has been maintained in the design in our minds of what this would look like as a structure going forward.
And Mayor, if I could just make a quick comment, in terms of process, we're not asking for a decision today, and I think the subcommittee may meet again to refine a few things. When we've got the board back together without the distraction of the legislative session, we'll want to spend a good chunk of a board meeting talking through this and making sure that everybody's comfortable with direction and before we refine it further.
Yes, thank you. So no decision made today. This is how it turned out when we had our discussions, and yeah, I think you're right. We'll have another one, and then we'll have a more comprehensive discussion as a board, not just a presentation, but a discussion as we go forward. So I appreciate your points, Mayor Walker, and Erin. Thank you, as always. Thank you for presenting that and for all of your help as we work through this. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Unless there's anything else, we're going to move on to item 6. All right, item 6 on our agenda. We appreciate having Patty Garber here with us from UTA. Patty she's the project manager, and she's here to report on the substance and status of the locally preferred alternative for the transit plan at Point of the Mountain. There's been a great deal of work done on this, and UTA has been really collaborating with local communities and stakeholders, and including the Point of the Mountain State Land Authority, and including those of us who serve as mayors of local communities. There's been a lot of work that's been done, and they've identified as a group this locally preferred alternative for transit to Point of the Mountain. It still needs to be approved, obviously, at several levels, local municipalities and UTA's advisory board and board of trustees, but Patty's here to offer us the findings of the Point of the Mountain Transit Study and to talk us through some of the next steps. So I'm going to turn the time over to Patty, and thank you for being here with us.
Thank you, Mayor Ramsey. So I'm here today, as Mayor Ramsey said, to give you an update on the Point of the Mountain Transit Study. I'm going to tell you about the locally preferred alternative that has been selected and how we came to that decision. So the steps that we went through to get to that selection. And so by the end, you'll understand why we made the selection that we did. For some of you, this is going to be a review because many of you have seen this already, but the majority of you will learn our locally preferred alternative today. So for some review, we started the project in August of 2019. The purpose of the project was to identify a high capacity rapid transit connection between southern Salt Lake County and northern Utah County, and also to connect to existing and future development areas. It's been a very collaborative effort between UTA, UDOT, the affected cities, the MPOs, and other stakeholders, including Point of the Mountain State Land Authority and Allen. So this shows you our schedule. As I said, we started in August of 2019. we defined our goals and objectives. We started with 5 alternatives that I will show you for our level 1 evaluation, which we then moved into a level 2 evaluation, and we selected the locally preferred alternative actually in December of last year. So these are the 5 alternatives that we started with. We had an east and a west light rail transit, an east and a west bus rapid transit, and then our 5th alternative was called east-west connections. So that was crossings of I-15 at three key points, and that was an enhanced bus option. So out of our level 1 evaluation, which also included a economic development roundtable in August, we determined that economic development was a key driver for the project. And also from our stakeholders, we heard the urgency of implementation was a priority for the project. So out of that, we focused on a common segment to all of the alternatives. And this common segment supported the initial goals, and it was shown to be a catalyst for economic development. And it is also more likely to receive funding and would be quicker and easier to implement. And in addition, it allows for us to potentially implement future phases associated with this common segment. So this figure, this green line, shows you the common segment that we have selected. So for our level 2 evaluation, we focus on this common segment, which on the north end starts at Draper Front Runner. It heads southeast across the point, up and over I-15 at 146 South. And then it enters our UTA right-of-way that we own on the east side of I-15 down to Lehigh and the southern terminus of Traverse Mountain Station, with the potential to also connect to additional southern stations that right now are associated with the Central Corridor BRT. And the project also looks at a potential connection to Lehigh Front Runner on the east side of I-15. So for our level 2 evaluation, we focused on this common ground segment, and we looked at 2 modes, bus rapid transit and rail. So this shows you the bus rapid transit alternative that we looked at in level 2 evaluation. So it uses Draper Front Runner, and it would travel on existing roadways here. So Front Runner Boulevard to Vista Station Boulevard, and then it would travel south, and it would have an elevated structure over Bangerter Highway. And this bus rapid transit option actually allows for 2 stations at the point. And that is because for whatever option we select, it has to have a retaining wall in order to get up and over I-15. But with bus rapid transit, you could have a shorter retaining wall, and therefore you could have 2 stations at the point. And so for this bus rapid transit, the key takeaways are that it would be gold standard, which means that it would be up to 90% exclusive guideway, which improves travel time and efficiencies for the transit. And it allows for 6 to 7 stations with the 2 at the point. And it also, gold standard also includes station areas with enhanced amenities. It includes transit signal priority at crossings. And it's almost like driving or riding on a train-like vehicle with rubber tires. So the other alternative that we looked at was rail. We had 2 technologies. One is called diesel multiple units, and then a light rail option. So the diesel multiple unit technology could actually use our existing Front Runner corridor in the Draper Front Runner area. And so it could use the Draper Front Runner station and existing infrastructure there. And then the light rail option at the Draper Front Runner would need a new corridor. So that would actually travel on the east side of Draper Front Runner. And then it would travel similar, once you get south of Vista Station, it would travel similar to the bus rapid transit. Although, as I mentioned, it could only have one station at the point because it requires a longer retaining wall to get up and over I-15. So it would then travel in the UTA corridor down to Lehigh. And it would be up to 95% exclusive lane. It would have one less station, and it would require a transfer to the Central Corridor project in Lehigh because it's rail and Central Corridor is bus. And then another difference is that it would need its own maintenance facility for this project. So out of the level 2 evaluation, what were the differentiators? So what was the difference between rail versus bus? So as you can see, the cost, bus comes in lower at 300 to 450 million. Rail would be between 450 and 850 million. As far as construction and operations, bus would be easier to construct and operate, although both rail and bus both benefit from the fact that a large portion of the study area is undeveloped, so that makes it easier to construct either option. So timing and implementation, BRT costs less, it's easier to construct, so therefore it's would be quicker to implement depending on funding available to construct the bus rapid transit. So what were the similarities between the two modes? Land use and economic development is shown to be fairly similar for both modes. Ridership also was similar for both modes. Wasatch Front Regional Council did all the modeling for the study. And then, as I mentioned, down in Lehigh, the bus rapid transit benefits from the fact that Central Corridor is a bus, and rail would be, the ridership would be decreased with rail because you have to have a transfer. And then both rail and bus would benefit from the future population and employment growth expected in the area. So out of our level 2 evaluation, the recommended locally preferred alternative is the common ground segment, that green line from Draper Front Runner to Lehigh Traverse Mountain. It's about 8 miles long. We could have up to 7 stations with the 2 at the point. As I said, it's bus rapid transit. And then we also have the option for additional stations down in Lehigh. So where we are now, we are similar to what's happening today. I'm going around to all of our stakeholders, giving updates as far as actions. Each city council will be approving the locally preferred alternative through a resolution. And I would mention to Mayor Walker that we're coming to your city council meeting next week to give an update on UVX, and also we have passes for all the city council to ride on UVX. Normally we would do tours, but with the pandemic, it's not as easy to do tours. The MPOs are each updating their long range plans. We have to amend the plans, and that can take up to, for Wasatch Front, that can take up to 6 months. So official adoption and approval by our advisory council and our board of trustees, that will come after the long range plan is amended, so sometime this summer. And then we are already starting on the environmental study, which last year, thanks to Ellen and the legislature, the environmental study was appropriated 750,000 TTIF funds to begin the study. And we also have, at this point, we have UTA local funds that are supplementing that. And we also have an application in for, it's called STBG funds, Surface Transportation Block Grant Funds from Wasatch Front, to also assist with funding of the environmental study. So that concludes my update of the LPA and the Point of the Mountain Transit Study. So that is where we are with the Common Ground segment of bus rapid transit between Draper Frontrunner and Lehigh. Any questions?
You need to add one more slide to this presentation, Patty, and
Yeah.
that is to show everyone that the first commercial train service was 28 February 1827, and the first commercial combustion bus service was in 1895. So it is in fact 74 years newer.
Okay.
Good point. That is a
Lest
good.
we be concerned that we're not using the sexy new technology of rail.
Yeah, that's a good point. That is,
I've got a question. What are the operational cost difference between rail versus BRT? Is it significant?
well, I don't have numbers to give you. The thing about buses is you do have to replace buses more often than rail vehicles. So that is a consideration. But as I said, the critical drivers for the project were speed of implementation and the economic development being a catalyst for this project. So we were focusing on speed and cost.
Thank you. Jim, did you have any other questions? Okay. Anyone else?
Okay.
I don't see any. Patty,
Well,
thank you so much. And I can
thanks.
tell you that I look forward to having the amended master plan, long range vision plans come through Wasatch Front Regional Council, and trying to help get those through in a timely manner will matter. As chair of the Regional Growth Committee for Wasatch Front Regional Council, those will come through. That's where those will come through. so I look
Okay.
having that happen. We'll do what we can to try to get that expedited.
Yeah.
And
Well, I'll be seeing you more than on that. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. We appreciate all of your efforts and this presentation. Good luck with that Draper City Council, I tell you. They're a
Thank
fantastic.
you.
Best of luck. Good people.
Bye.
And Mayor Ramsey,
Yes.
can I ask a question? I don't want to like totally backtrack, but I am a little concerned. I know that Alan is stretched so thin and he has so many things on his plate right now. I'm concerned that we're not moving this business plan forward, or that we're going to move it forward a little slowly. I think that, in the plan that was presented, I believe that like the development director would be something that probably should be brought on in June or July, which means things have got to move really fast. And I'm just afraid that a lot of this process is moving a little slowly. And I don't know how we move this forward. I know it's not an action item today, nor would we assume that anybody would make a decision right now. But how do we move this forward and get to a decision so that we're not slowing the process down and overburdening Alan?
I think that's a fair point, and I appreciate you asking the question. I think at this point, with so many of our board members, half of our board members not here right now, right, because of the legislature, obviously this is a discussion item, but I would be very supportive of recommending that it come back on the next agenda for us to, as an action item, for a discussion and an action item. And we'll have to see how Representative Snow feels about that. I'm going to imagine he's going to agree with what you just said, as far as we don't want to hold things up and move any slower than we need to, but really that's a call he'll have to make.
But those that are here today, I mean, maybe if there's any comments on what they would like to see or what they need to feel good about that, so that we don't present it again in the next meeting and then wait for another meeting to make a decision. It would be helpful to be able to make some progress is all I'm saying. So maybe if anybody else has things that they want to see to be able to make a decision, maybe it would be helpful to know that now.
Jim, this is Dave. I would agree. I'd like to hear from Alan what he thinks about that and kind of the timing that he sees would be the best.
Yeah, thank you. I absolutely agree. And I think we've all thought we need to be able to move ahead and be able to get the right people in place at the beginning of the fiscal year. So part of that is because we won't have funding for it before then. We really need to see what comes out of the legislature, and we'll talk about that in a minute, so we know what flexibility we have to hire people. But yeah, I think my expectation would be that we will meet again with this subcommittee. We would absolutely welcome input, concerns, ideas from the rest of the board, and that this would be an action item on the next agenda. And so I think we could put together a list of more clarified recommendations from the subcommittee, get it out to the board well in advance of the next meeting so you have a chance to digest it, and then target making a decision so that we can start looking for the right people to fill the right positions. But as always, I take your guidance.
I think that's great. And I'm seeing a lot of head nods. And I think the opportunity to maybe refine the recommendations, get input from everybody, get it sent out so people do have time in advance, that will save a little bit of time in our next board meeting so we can have the discussion that we need to have as a board, but then be able to take a vote. Yeah, I think that's what we should plan on for next time. Again, it's not my call either. It's probably up to Representative Snow and Lieutenant Governor Henderson, but I would imagine that's probably what they'll be okay with. And I think if that's the recommendation that we all have, that's what we pass along. Okay, we'll do that. Thank you. Appreciate that. Anybody have any additional thoughts on that? Okay, thanks. All right, we're going to move on to item number 7 on our agenda. We have a legislative update. There is a lot going on at the legislature, and I find myself spending a great deal of time doing that in a variety of ways. And we are excusing Representative Snow and Handy and Senator Fillmore. We have a lot of people who are there right now. But Alan, we're going to turn it over to you and let you give that update. And I got a text from Representative Snow a little bit ago that any information that you are aware of as far as the infrastructure bank bill and appropriations requests, you have a little bit more information about those, and he'd love for you to share that if you would. So we'll turn the time over to you, Alan.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, let me just talk about 2 things. One, our appropriations request, and the second, an infrastructure bill that we started to talk about a little last time. And then if anyone else wants to add anything, you certainly may. As we've discussed today, we've got some expenses coming up. If we're going to get support, be able to have some staff, bring in our consultant teams, look at development expertise to bring to the table. That's not going to happen without some resources to do it. Before the session, I had some conversations with legislative leadership about how we ought to proceed. And they universally encouraged us to, quote, swing for the fences and get an appropriation this session while there is a good amount of one-time money available that would cover us over the next 3 to 5 years. So again, in consultation with our board leadership and with legislative leadership, put together an appropriations request that's being sponsored by Senator Fillmore. And it has an ongoing and a one-time component. The ongoing component would be for $810,000, again, to cover our ongoing staff needs, things like travel, supplies, computers, office expenses, all of the operational matters that we are going to need for the long term. And the second was a one-time request for $11,490,000. Again, that's to cover roughly the next 5 years of our consultants, the early development. We're not looking at this for infrastructure costs, but we're looking at it for operational costs. So as we put together the general plan, as we start to bring in consultants that can develop the sector plans or the district plans, helping to plan for transportation, bringing in development partners, et cetera. So that's the request. It has gone through Business, Economic Development, and Labor Committee. This morning they prioritized them. The one-time request was prioritized 36 out of 61, and the ongoing was 27 out of 39. So not as high as we might have liked, but now it goes on to executive appropriations, and I've started communicating with them, sending them some information. We've got a document that summarizes the request, how it would be used, what the deliverables would be, pretty good background on the point of the Mountain State Land Authority and where we are in the process. So we'll continue to work with them on that and see where it goes. But again, to a large degree, what happens with that appropriations request will dictate what we can do in terms of our organizational plan. Any questions on that? I feel fairly confident given support that we have at high levels, but never take anything for granted.
Alan, is there anything that we can do as members of the board to reach out to the Executive Appropriations Committee? Would a letter in behalf of the board be beneficial? Do you think that's necessary, or do you feel?
There's certainly value in having support from the influential people on this board. And if you'd be willing to write a letter from the board or just individually contact members of the Appropriations Committee that you have a good relationship with and promote our efforts, that would be tremendously valuable.
Okay.
And then maybe just a word on this other bill, and there's not a lot of detail I can give you, but Senator Stevenson had this concept of developing infrastructure banks for MIDA, the Military Installation Development Authority, the Inland Port, and the Point of the Mountain. And he's asked Representative Snow to sponsor one of those bills related to the Point of the Mountain. So I think that they're likely to have 3 separate bills. The idea would be that it would create an account where proceeds that are provided by the legislature, proceeds from the sale or lease of land, other income that we might receive could be housed and used for needed infrastructure at the site. And I haven't seen a draft of it yet, but the last description I heard was that it would be overseen by a separate board, probably a subset of our board, and would be able to structure deals that meet the needs of the organization. So there is a state infrastructure bank, for example, but often they need to start being paid back immediately. We're not going to be getting revenue off of this site for a few years, but we may need the money earlier to start the infrastructure. So we'd need the ability to have some funds, be able to invest in infrastructure, and then pay it back, maybe starting a little bit later when revenues are generated at the site. So it gives us flexibility to meet the specific needs of this project. So that's about all I know about that bill. And again, haven't seen a draft yet.
Great, thank you. Anybody have any questions for Alan? I mean, there's a lot of questions and he's done a good job of answering what he can. But okay, thank you for your efforts. And those of us who feel like perhaps it would be helpful if we reached out to members of the Executive Appropriations Committee in support of our request for funding for Point of the Mountain, that's going to be critical. So I think I would encourage that we do that.
And Mayor, I might just say, as part of the packet that we sent out to everybody, we included that handout to the legislature, which includes background on the organization and details about that appropriations request. So that may be helpful to you.
Excellent. There's good talking points on that as well. Yes, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Okay. Alan, any additional final thoughts before we call for a motion to adjourn? This is a unique meeting because we have such a small group, but I really do appreciate all of you who have been here. Thank you for all of you who are working so hard. And you know, we've talked so much about our planning and where we're at with that, but I don't want to overlook Muriel's team and how great they've been doing with all of our communications and public relations. Thank you for all of your efforts as well. We appreciate X Factor and your whole team and everything that you're doing. Thank you. And Cece as well. All of you. I'm looking at all of you going, I could thank each of you individually, and I would like to anyway. We just really do appreciate all of your efforts. And so, Alan, if you have anything you'd like to add, otherwise, go ahead and do that, and then I'll call for a motion to adjourn.
I love this team. It's great to be involved with. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. With that, we are prepared to adjourn this meeting of the Point of the Mountain State Land Authority. And if I can get a motion to do that, that would be great.
So moved.
Thank you. We have a motion. Can I get a second?
Second.
All in favor of adjourning, please say aye.
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 Aye. This meeting is adjourned, and thank you to all of you. We'll look forward to seeing you next time, and good luck the rest of this session. Thanks.